The air was thick with tension, an almost suffocating silence hung over Ajoke and Yemi. The events of the night weighed heavily on them both. Yemi had insisted she stay with him, at least until they could figure out their next move. Ajoke hadn't spoken much since the warehouse incident. Her eyes told stories of guilt, regret, and fear, while Yemi watched her closely, protective and concerned. It was early morning when Ajoke woke up to the smell of breakfast being made in Yemi's small kitchen. She sat up, dazed for a moment, her mind clouded by the nightmares she'd had throughout the night. Her life had become a series of moments she wished she could undo, but the weight of those choices remained like a shadow over her heart. Yemi turned from the stove when he heard her stirring. "Morning," he said softly, walking toward her with a plate of food. "You need to eat something." Ajoke looked up at him, her eyes tired, the weight of her world clearly visible in them. She hadn't had an appetite in days, but she nodded, taking the plate from him. She picked at the food, forcing herself to eat a few bites out of gratitude. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the quiet clinking of utensils. Ajoke's mind raced. What would she do now? Where would she go? She had no answers. Tony's threat still rang in her ears, but more than that, the betrayal she had committed against her sister made her chest tighten every time she thought about it. Yemi finally broke the silence. "Ajoke," he began cautiously, "we need to talk about what's next." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know what's next, Yemi. I don't even know how I got here." Yemi moved closer, kneeling down beside her. "Look, I know it's hard, but you can't stay trapped in this situation. Tony's not going to stop unless we do something." Ajoke's body tensed at the mention of Tony. She had been trying to push him out of her mind, but it was impossible. The nightmare of his presence was real and it wasn't going to just go away. Later that day, Yemi suggested they go for a walk, hoping fresh air would clear Ajoke's mind. They strolled through the busy streets of the city, keeping a low profile. Ajoke's mind was still far from at ease, but Yemi's presence offered her some small sense of comfort. As they walked, Ajoke started to open up. "I've ruined everything," she muttered, more to herself than to Yemi. Yemi stopped and turned to her, his eyes gentle but firm. "You didn't ruin anything, Ajoke. Tony did. You were a victim in this, and you need to stop blaming yourself for what he did." Ajoke shook her head. "I should have stopped it. I should have told Bonmi the truth. But now, I don't even have the courage to face her." Yemi gently took her hand. "You're stronger than you think. But first, we need to make sure Tony can't hurt you anymore." Days passed. Yemi had taken it upon himself to look out for Ajoke, helping her avoid Tony at all costs. They both knew they couldn't hide forever, but for now, it was the only option. However, Tony was relentless. He would call Ajoke repeatedly, leaving threatening messages when she didn't answer. One evening, while Yemi was out running errands, Ajoke received another message. She hesitated before listening to it, her hands trembling as she pressed the play button. "Ajoke, you think you can hide forever? I'll find you. You know what I'm capable of. If you don't come back, I'll destroy everything, your sister, your life, everything. You belong to me now." Ajoke's breath caught in her throat, her heart racing with fear. Tony's voice was cold, devoid of any humanity. She knew he was serious. He had already taken so much from her, and he would stop at nothing to ruin whatever little she had left. When Yemi returned, he found her sitting on the floor, her phone clutched in her hand, tears running down her face. "He called again," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He's going to destroy everything. I can't keep running, Yemi." Yemi crouched down in front of her, his face set in determination. "We are not running anymore. We are going to deal with him, once and for all." That night, Yemi decided to confront Tony. He knew it was dangerous, but he couldn't let Tony keep terrorizing Ajoke. He asked Ajoke to stay behind, fearing for her safety, but she refused to let him go alone. They drove in silence to Tony's apartment. Ajoke's heart pounded in her chest as they approached the building. Yemi parked a little distance away, and they sat in the car for a few moments, mentally preparing for the confrontation. "Are you sure about this?" Ajoke asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yemi nodded. "We have to do this." They walked up to Tony's apartment, Yemi leading the way with Ajoke trailing behind. The hallway was eerily quiet, amplifying the sound of their footsteps. Yemi knocked on the door, his fist firm and determined. The door swung open, and there stood Tony, a smug grin on his face. Well, look who decided to show up," Tony sneered. His eyes darted to Ajoke, and his grin widened. "Missed me, did you?" Ajoke felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat, but she held her ground. Yemi stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. "This ends today, Tony. You leave her alone. If you ever come near her again, I'll make sure you regret it." Tony laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You think you can stop me? You don't know who you're dealing with." The tension between the two men was palpable. Tony's arrogance was infuriating, and Yemi's rage simmered just beneath the surface. Ajoke stood frozen, her mind racing. This was the moment everything would either end here or spiral further out of control. Suddenly, Tony lunged toward Yemi, and the two men clashed in a violent struggle. Ajoke screamed, backing away as they grappled with each other. Tony's rage was wild, but Yemi was strong, fueled by his need to protect Ajoke. The fight escalated, fists flying and bodies slamming against walls. Finally, Yemi managed to pin Tony to the ground, his fist raised, ready to end it all. "Don't!" Ajoke's voice rang out, stopping Yemi mid-strike. "He's not worth it." Yemi hesitated, his fist still clenched, but slowly, he lowered his hand. Tony, bloodied and beaten, laughed weakly. "This isn't over," Tony spat, his voice full of venom. "I'll make sure you pay for this." Yemi got up, pulling Ajoke away from the apartment. As they walked out into the night, Ajoke realized that though the confrontation had ended, the scars of Tony's actions would stay with her forever. As they drove away, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on Ajoke's heart. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild her life, free from Tony's grasp. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "Was this truly over?" Thanks for watching. Your support means everything to me. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to follow for more updates, comment to share your thoughts, and like to show your love for the journey we're on together. Your feedback and interaction help keep this story alive, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Together, we can make this a story to remember. This is Wilfred the Dreamer.